My guest today is JayMan. He is one of the greats of human biodiversity blogging. He's been in the field for well over 10 years. And we discuss how human biodiversity and the discussion around it has changed in the last decade, moving from secret corners of the internet to the main stage on X and beyond into politics, and how that might impact our future. We also talk about HBD as a political info hazard, question mark, the impact of clannish men in Western countries, especially in the manosphere. We also talk about the baby boom and how it was prompted by the relative change in status for men compared to women, and how that's possible or impossible nowadays. We also talk about why cutting edge fertility technology will probably take off in Eastern Europe and China before it takes off in the Western part of Europe. And also about assortative mating and its impact on our future. And ancient question, does parenting matter? A question that I ask myself every day. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with JayMan. If you do want to participate in the conversation around podcasts that I record, around my writing, please do go to alexkashuta.com. That's my Substack, where you can participate in the community and get all sorts of benefits, perks, everything early. Every gated episode ever made is also there. Or you could go to patreon.com/aksubversive for the audio of every podcast ever recorded. Thank you so much for supporting me, and enjoy the conversation. So, as far as I know, and as far as I have experienced you as a Twitter poster and person who writes on the internet, you are someone who has been in the wider human biodiversity space for quite longer than I have been, and for since more of the Ur blog era. You had a column blog on uns.com, where the people wrote about this subject when no one else was touching it. So I wonder what you feel has changed. I know now we have all sorts of people, more high profile people, like huge accounts talking about HBD on twitter.com, or I guess x.com now. And, some things are more public, some things are still not sayable. How have you perceived this shift from where you started and what's going on now?
It seems like a mixed bag now. I mean, it's definitely improved in many places, and it's harder in others because trying to get a leak in from a mainstream source is difficult because there's a lot of censorship. But if you go on X or Twitter, it's pretty easy to find HBD stuff. That is the place to be for HBD these days. It just seems strange because that I've been writing for 13, 14 years now. It's just strange when I dig out and I find a lot of my blog posts that I feel like some of my newer stuff is still almost 10 years old. Yeah, it's been a while. I think Elon Musk coming in to buy Twitter was a monumental shift because that really lifted a lot of the censorship, and a lot of accounts exploded during that time. The one fellow there, and this is probably the first time I'm hearing it said. I'm saying it, so I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Kremu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's definitely a prolific writer that exploded over the last few years. Some of the older guard people like Steve Saylor and Charles Murray are still there. We still have Greg Cochran, the venerable Greg Cochran. He's still there. A lot of the people from my day, I don't see them very much anymore. Some of the mid-level ones that were around my time, a few of them are.
Richard Hanania?
Yeah, I don't know. Hanania is half entertainer, half, source of information at this point. You just got to know how to take him.
He knows how to play the game, that's for sure. Like, he knows
Yeah,
how to
that's
blog.
that's a big part of it nowadays. I mean, a lot of there's so much more focus on getting engagement. I think Cremio is the only one that actually does it by straight just posting data. He's the one that actually manages to get engagement by just posting facts and insights, and it's mostly facts that he's collected. And he's the source for that, and I'm pretty impressed with him on that. Emil Kierkegaard, he's still doing great. He does facts. he does his own analysis. He's doing pretty well. But a lot of the others, it's more the engagement games. You're just gonna say the right words to get traction going, and it's sort of quite a different world than when I was in there, when I was new.
Yeah, and it feels like it's become quite popular. Like this information really was gated even maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, when people kind of in my circle started to become a bit more clued in on the bare facts of life, and now it seems like there's actual kind of mass media, be it
Yeah.
alternative, that reaches millions upon millions of people. People know about FBI crime statistics, not that they weren't public, but people just didn't really interpret them in any way. So now it's I don't know, what do you make of the potential impact of this? I mean, could HBD be an info hazard? Is it better to just have like some little blogs talking about it, or is it absolutely fine for it to just be
Well, I mean,
out there?
you can't ignore the truth forever, because even if you try to, it's still there. It's trying to ignore the elephant in the room. It's going to step on you eventually if you keep ignoring it. So, I mean, there's no ignoring it. Um, we've done a pretty good job, though. Mostly liberals have done a good job of suppressing it up to this point, but it's definitely getting harder to ignore. And I think what is it? JD Vance follows Premio,
Hmm.
and he's one of the longtime followers, and well, not that long, but at least for a few years, in HBD circles like sailors and all of them. So that's pretty impressive. An incoming vice president is someone that follows it. So yeah, it definitely has potential to get out there. And I think that the problem, I think, is inevitable. It's that as the white share of the population, which historically the majority, to be clear for people listening, I'm not pro-white or anything. That I'm pro people and pro social harmony as much as possible. But as diversity increases, you're going to see more tension, because it's becoming more salient for the soon to be former majority white population, that they are on their way to become a minority, and that is one of the things that's driving racial tension. Now, when you have HBD, the reality of HBD underlying that, it illustrates there's certain challenges coming with that reality. And I think that it's something that's going to play a role in one way or another in the future to come. I think that actually proper understanding of HBD is just something most people can't do. So you're not really going to have pure understanding of the facts. You're going to have a lot of people using it for whatever pet agenda they want to have. But I think that I hope this is more hope than think that you have enough people who have their heads on right and understand it enough and don't have really malicious intentions, that we might actually go to a better place for this. I hope.
I like how you phrase that as a question, and on a high note. Yeah, I think I share your hope for that. I mean, I'm also someone who's been talking about HBD for quite a while, and I'm convinced. I think it has many truth claims, but at the same time, I see how um, you know this type of information trickles down through, I guess, the cognitive stratification of society, and how it is interpreted by people, like certain concept within it, like even just the idea of averages. I think a lot of people can't comprehend. It's the idea that X group is dumber than Y group is very easily comprehended. People can digest it. A lot of anecdotes, a lot of video, a lot of things like that can flow into that, and provide confirmation, provide evidence to prove whatever assertion like that. But then it's very hard to provide anecdotal evidence to something like there is a average 2-point IQ difference between men and women, and
Yeah.
what even is that? What is it tangible in your day to day life? How because I see people bringing this up as some
Yeah.
sort of gotcha when they have an argument online or something like that. it doesn't mean what you think it means.
Oh,
And these are people who, obviously have a certain amount of verbal aptitude. They're sparring online and probably above average intelligence. And then you think there's a chasm of even lower than that who can barely interpret all of this. And they're obviously political agents as well. They're voting.
mm,
So it's tough. I don't personally. I don't know. I think the truth is very important, but also yes, info hazards exist, and I really don't know exactly how this massive information is going to be received.
yeah, yeah. No, that well, I mean, with the average issues, how between the average difference between sexes, how you could point out how you see that in day-to-day life. It's small in the means, but it's big in the extremes. So just think of how mathematicians or anything like that, or any STEM field really, that the more the more complex you go into STEM, the less and less the female, the smaller and smaller the female fraction becomes. That's both due to interest. It's just, women generally aren't as interested in things, and also just lower talent. Because when you get out to the extremes, the male advantage, which is primarily in the variance, is greater for males, not so much the average. That I've seen conflicting data whether or not there's a male advantage in average, but there's definitely a greater male variance, and that's going to lead to more men out on the far ends, on both ends. But I think there's one figure that has made a very important HBD finding, who, for good or ill, it's probably better for him that he hasn't gotten more attention that he has. But probably the most, what would be the most salient finding for anyone, is Gregory Clark's work. The fact that social status is transmits pretty stably through from generation to generation. The fact that you can have a statistical prediction of where descendants of current people are going to end up, or where their ancestors were. I've seen. I have a conversation with a friend of mine. Was talking about. He's worried about having children. Well, he's going to hear this and he's going to know I'm talking about him. But he's worried about having children because he finds it would be too challenging to assure that they're going to end up in the upper elite. And I wanted to say to him, like, well, is that the background of your family, or your the child's mother's background? That's your best predictor of where your children are going to end up. I mean, where was your family background and the other parents' background? What's the mean for their family? If their family tends to be more accomplished and your family tends to be more accomplished, odds are your children are going to be such a way. And and if they're not so much, then they probably won't be. But this is true anywhere in the world. So if you're looking at immigrants from various countries or whatever, if you look at the particular immigrant, if you want to have an idea of where they're going to fit in society, well, what are these particular immigrants? Where were they in their society? Typically, when you have more unrestricted immigration, like into Europe, you're finding they're getting people that are more average, more typical of their countries. I mean, you can just simply frame this, well, these are people who are coming from the middle to lower end of their respective societies. They're probably not going to do so well in our society if you're coming to a Western country. Or in the case of the United States, we tend to get more elite immigrants because travel to the U.S. tends to be more expensive. So we tend to get more elite immigrants who, in their source countries, tended to be more elite. So, of course, when they come here, they continue to be elite. Their absolute earning goes up because you can earn more in the States, but their relative position in society remains roughly constant. I mean, and that's going to be the case for their descendants, and the the, the descendants of. I mean, it's true for your own children. A lot of people are worried about where their children are going to be. Like my fellow has spoken about. Well, if your background was to be relatively average, it's probably where your children are going to be.
Yeah, It's tough because there's, especially in the American kind of ethos, there's this idea of social mobility built in. I think there was an era where that was a little bit more possible before kind of this fairly strict assortative mating has happened. I mean, Murray talks about this quite a lot in Coming Apart. And do you think that um, these cognitive stratifications through assortative mating, do you think that this slowly consolidates, or is it a bit mediated by the fact that people are intermarrying through across countries? But like, for example, I married a man that I met in London.
Hmm.
He is from New Zealand. I'm from Romania,
Hmm.
but strangely, we're from the same exact class
Of
of
course,
people, kind of middle class, upper middle class of our
of,
respective countries,
of course you
and
are.
and then we also somehow are of the exact same genetic background. We were both German, Polish, for some reason, even though I'm born in Romania. So somehow we kind of found each other, whatever, sent or something
Yeah,
like that. But
like
yeah,
finds like likes attract to like. It's amazing.
it's
It's sort of amazing. Assortative mating. It's amazing how powerful it is. That people are
yeah.
drawn to similar traits.
Yeah, so do you think this is going to consolidate further, or is there something that's gonna mediate this? Is just kind of social climbing or anything, is that going to be in any way possible in our near future, or is that done with?
Well, well, if you go by Clark's data, Clark says the assortative mating hasn't really changed much. It's been at least in the places he looked at. Certainly, the last thing I've seen talk about his last book, last paper that he's making, he was looking at England, and he found that assortative mating was roughly constant. And he mentioned that, especially like in the U.S. in mid 20th century, you would seem like a lot of people moving out of industrial or agrarian jobs into these middle classes, and it looked like it was social mobility. But what was really happening was just the economy, this way the economy is structured was changing, such that uh, what the different status levels were doing was changing, but people weren't really changing where they were so much in the pecking order. So um, what you're getting now is that you're getting more specialization, that people are able to really dig down into the nitty gritty when finding a mate. They're getting an even more perfect match, but they're basically still matching, as you saw, in their same rough social class. So, you know, on the in the big picture, that's not really changing much. And where this is going, there are a couple of wild cards in it, actually. I mean, I don't expect to be more social mobility because there really hasn't been. What you might see is, immigrants from poorer countries coming to richer ones, and they take advantage of the higher salaries available. But you know, they're not really changing their place in society. They're just fitting into a newer standard of living. Um, but the wild card going forward is genetic technologies like gene editing, embryo selection, all those things. You know, the timing of how those play out and all those things. That could change a lot. The upside of that is that can actually have permanent impacts, because if you do embryo screening and you give your offspring like a 5 or 10 IQ point boost, that's permanent. Their descendants are going to have that 5 or 10 point boost. So you're actually going to increase the mean for the whole population, and that's good. But who knows when that's going to come to place? Who's going to get to use it? How the regulation and laws are going to shake out between all that. It's really hard to say. The only upside with that makes me a little less concerned is that whatever concerns about natural fertility trends, like whether or not there's dysgenic fertility and all that, that all operates really slowly. I mean, that takes several generations for you to see a difference. And in that time, we're almost certainly going to have this genetic technology. So that will counteract it well before that becomes any much of a problem. barring any other problems with like artificial intelligence and all that. So that's the other big wild card.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of this discourse on fertility trends and declining fertility, you do see it kind of relegated to a corner of right-wing discourse,
Yeah,
the more kind of tech-averse corner, where they don't even necessarily want to consider the whole kind of fertility tech angle,
yeah,
even though it's like the adoption of IVF and technologies like that is increasing like exponentially. Even here in Romania, which is you'd say kind of like a second tier country, it's developing, but it's still not where it should be. Like genetic screening of fetuses, pretty maybe not standard, but very widely available. People use it all the time.
yeah,
IVF, like I know, of 5 women that I know that have had children in the last few years, 2 of them have had IVF, and this is not like some super exclusive circle. So it's people are kind of itching to access this stuff, especially if they have like serious fertility issue. Because
yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I can kind of see uh um embryo selection or any gene technologies actually becoming more rapidly adopted in uh like southern Eastern Europe, East Asia, places like that. Because I think there's going to be less discussions of ethics or all that stuff, not
yeah.
less weird thinking, less Northwestern European weird thinking.
This is
So,
really interesting because you're right. And I think a lot of people would find what you said a bit counterintuitive because, people here theoretically are more religious. There's more kind of, I don't know, adherence to traditionalism and all this
yeah,
type of stuff. But at the same time, there's just been so much historical upheaval and so much, people are shockingly materialistic in like the, godless materialism sense in practical terms. Like I think
yeah,
people would be very shocked. They could go to church every Sunday, but they would very much be on board with IVF if that offers them a solution, a direct one. People don't get as entangled in theology, as entangled in wokeness, as entangled in any sort of kind of this religious or pseudo-religious kind of moral framework that you see being super important in the West. Like people really kind of tie themselves up in knots about things.
yeah,
Here, for better or worse, people are very direct. Okay, what would it take for me to achieve my goal? There is technology X, you can see this also in interventions for beauty rituals and all this stuff. You see
oh, of
Asia
course,
is consumed by this, Eastern
no,
Europe as well. You're ugly, you want to be beautiful. How much will it cost me? There's
exactly,
no consideration about fat phobia and things like that, like all like pseudo religious type of stuff. Here it's like, okay, it's $10,000 for a set of boobs. I
go
have
for
to
it.
save up. That's
Nope.
pretty much the only thing that you think about. So yeah, it is really interesting. And like I said, people probably don't feel this if you don't spend time here, if you don't really see kind of how people actually act in life
Yeah,
rather than what they say they do.
yeah, yeah. Less weird guilt.
Yes.
They say it's white guilt, but it's not white guilt. Weird guilt. It doesn't apply to Southern and Eastern European so much. It's a Northwestern European thing. The weird guilt. And they don't have those hangups there. And I think, the holdup is that the development is mostly going to be in the weirder countries because that's where the progress is happening. But I think the adoption is going to be for the masses is going to be more prolific in uh, the high IQ, less weird world. Eastern Europe, East Asia, they're going to be okay with any gene editing and embryo selection or whatever. It's like smarter, healthier children. I mean, what's the problem? I would have used it if it was available to me in a hot second. So, but
Yeah, I think one kind of issue there would be that you kind of really have to step outside the natural, system of procreation, at least for now, in terms of how the technology is now and how it will probably be for the foreseeable future, in the sense that you can't just conceive naturally and then have them, edit your child's in
yeah,
utero. You have to use IVF. You have to,
yeah,
have frozen embryos, all this type of stuff,
yeah,
which essentially is now mostly for people who really don't have another choice. So if you can conceive
yeah,
naturally, you probably won't do it. You really have to be very tech
Yeah.
obsessed to want to go that way, like like Malcolm Collins and Simone Collins, and
Yep.
I really respect them for their kind of lifelong experiment for what they're doing, but it wouldn't be my speed if I if I could help it, because it really is cumbersome. Like it involves a lot, not only of cost, but just like physically really demanding for the mother. And yeah, I just from that perspective, I think that's a really big limitation on it.
Yeah. I mean, between the cost and how involved it is, that's going to impede its adoption, and it really won't become uh, a big factor in the big picture until it becomes relatively widespread adoption. Until you have like 10% of people more doing it. So that is, excuse me.
Yeah, I think, if the exo-womb technology would also show up, then together that would be much more
Yeah,
feasible.
I see that happening down the line. And I think the same thing goes with that. That's probably going to be more easily adopted in the unweird world than in the weird Western world. Um, because I can see an exo womb being a little bit outside of people's comfort zone more so than just simply some kind of in vitro procedure. Because at least in vitro, it's coming back to the mom and you're still having a natural birth and all that. But the exo womb, yeah, that's going to take a while to filter down the masses, I think, just because it just seems a bit more alien, I think. But
Yeah, no.
we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as someone who's, had no problem, having my own children, it's one of those things like, would I have accepted, doing this knowing that it's, an uncomplicated technology?
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe. I mean, if you really are limited in your fertility and you're not just,
yeah,
not just IVF limited, but I don't know, you're inhospitable to life, let's
yeah.
say, then maybe, some people are desperate. So I think there's definitely a market for it. But will
Yeah,
there be, huge, matrix style farms for babies in the future? I don't
who
know.
knows? It's possible. It may happen somewhere. I could,
Yeah. In
I would not
Ukraine,
be.
probably.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it could be Ukraine. I was going to say China. I wouldn't be surprised seeing it happen in China. Wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised. I think, you're going to be early adopters, and then there's people like me who aren't early adopters, but like seeing if have other people do it, and then see how well it works. And I think once these things become a bit more commonplace, then they might start taking off. Um,
Yeah. Like
it's
GLP-1 agonists.
oh yeah, that's going to
We're all
take off.
just waiting to see if anyone's getting any tumors around us.
Yeah,
Then,
I think the cost is the holdup on that one. Really, I think a lot more people would be more than willing to go. They've been around long enough, and if there were any major obvious side effects, they would be evident by now. And everything we're showing, the data we're showing, is turning out that any long-term effects are positive, if anything. It seems to make you avoid certain disease. The GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Zepbound and all that good stuff. They seem to they're like the first real Star Trek drugs, I've called them. They seem to make you live longer. Well, maybe not live longer, but less incidence of cardiovascular illness. Probably will make you live longer. Um, Less kidney disease. I mean, they only look good. So I
yeah.
can see that when the cost comes down, they're going to be just something everyone just does.
Yeah,
Um,
and strange, like kind of unexpected kind of psychological effects as well, like being able to put alcohol
yeah,
easier, nicotine, things like that. That was
yeah,
really interesting. Even mood effects, some
yep,
of them, just general kind of orderliness, bumps you up a little bit in conscientiousness, like
yeah.
what's not to love?
They're anti-dependency drug.
Mhm.
That that's pretty good. I mean, and unintended consequences. I'm sure when they made those, that they didn't expect it to have all those. They have all those effects, but that's how progress works.
Yeah, it's wasn't it like an extract of the um Gila monster or something like that? Venom, yeah. Coincidence that they found it.
And
Yeah.
that should be the lesson to people out there. You should leave scientists alone. When people are working on weird things that you don't understand, you don't know what's going to pay off. You know,
Yeah,
knowledge is
exactly.
good. Knowledge is, because there's people out there who always question some of the strange things scientists work on, and well, you never know what's going to pay off.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
absolutely. That,
mean,
that was a case recently with the what was it, the Department of Government Efficiency.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, be careful what you slash.
yeah. I know. I mean, Elon is pro progress, so maybe he'll be cool with that, but who knows? I'm very interested to see how that's actually going to play out because I can't. Department of Government Efficiency. What does that mean? Because you can't really have a metric because the government isn't a business. So, you know,
Yeah, and there's all sorts of constraints on what you can do with government employees. I mean, I've had a previous guest on, and the idea is essentially that you have to do a whole restructuring on the laws of employment for government
yes.
employee. You just can't just show up and say, you, get out of here. Plus, most of government spending is entitlements as welfare in some way. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's another can of worms.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a thing that more right wing people just have to come to accept. I mean, a certain percent of people are just not economically viable, you know? So, what are you going to do with them in the modern economy? You know, and
And I
I
think
think,
that's true, but at the same time, it's not politically viable to take back entitlements, even if you've given them to
oh,
people
yeah.
who would be economically viable.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you're
That's it.
stuck.
That's a one-way street. Once you give it to them, you can't ever take it back.
Yeah,
So,
you know this if you have children.
nope.
Once you've opened the door to a certain type of treat at a certain type of time or a certain type
That's
of
it. What's
perk,
about
can't take it back.
yeah, that's the way it is. I mean, and hey, people need to live too. I mean, I think that the issue is really the immigration factor. Is that it's certainly with Europe. I don't know. I think European countries are in a lot of trouble. Um, you can have these entitlements, but you can't have unlimited immigration with that. I mean, because how is that going to play out? Do they really believe? I know. I asked the question that do they really believe these people are just going to become integrated citizens, just like your current citizens, and are going to be fine taxpayers, and it's all going to be good? No, that's not what's going to happen. You're creating a permanent dependent class. I mean, that's not a good place to go. But
Yeah, I mean, it's, Eastern Europe, we don't, obviously, because we're not as developed as Western Europe, and we're kind of seen as a port of, people go through Eastern Europe to get
hmm
to Western Europe at the moment. But we don't have this problem. But yes, I mean, I've lived in Western Europe for a while, and to be honest, this is kind of what made me become more right wing and be, more interested in the finer points of right wing ideology. It's the fact that I moved there, and obviously these very for someone coming from Eastern Europe, these are very aspirational places. This is
yeah,
where we want to go as a society. This is what we look up to. The Berlin Wall fell, and we really like West Berlin. That's kind of the idea. And then you move
yeah,
to these places because I lived in Spain, and I lived in Austria, and I lived in London for a long time, and the tensions there, were the police obviously was either underpowered, not enough people, but at the same time, there was just no enforcement of the law for particular subcategories of people. The fear was that you would anger communities. Like there was this whole bunch of people that if you upset one of their dependents, you could spark this, interethnic tension. And obviously no one really wanted to do that. They would really use kid gloves with everything because if you happen to injure someone or something like that, and that happened a few times in a police chase, you would have an instant riot.
wow,
And what also kind of sparked it for me was that I was living in an area in East London where these riots happened occasionally, and there was a whole riot. And I was like, things burning,
mm,
just like people setting stuff on fire, breaking windows, and there was absolutely no coverage of it. Like I was going on the internet, and there were a few posts on Twitter, but just by individuals, and
yeah,
the media would not cover it, and it was really like scary because my apartment was here, and there was like a burning trash can here, and people like waving like tire irons in my face, and I was like, okay, this is insane. I have no protection. Something's got to give here. So
yeah,
obviously, what I did was become very right wing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds downright dystopian, really, because see, at least in America, there's a level of for the more liberal people, there's a level of plausible deniability in what is actually happening because we get so much better immigrants. So when you have immigrants coming in, and if this is your only exposure to the non-Western cultures, you're going to say, well, they're not so bad, right? If you look at Indian immigrants or African immigrants, African immigrants especially because they tend to be pretty select. And if you think that the whole population is like this, you're like, wow, they're not so bad. But in Europe, they're getting an actual slice of the average of the population. I mean, so that's like we're just gonna go and we're gonna throw you right in. You're gonna get it, and you can't talk about it. You need this censorious society because if people just simply said what they saw, you know, I think a lot of that there'd be actual discussion, and a lot of it would be shut down pretty quickly. But they have to be censorious about it. I say it all the time on Twitter. God bless America and God bless the First Amendment. I could not live like that. It, it's insane.
Yeah, I call this the my college roommate effect, where people who go to college, like higher elite people, they always have some college roommate from, I
Yep.
don't know, Bangladesh or something like that, who's just like a swell guy.
Oh
He's just like from a high caste, no problem, speaks
yeah,
five languages. His dad owns many many acres of land and wherever, and it's like, yes, I have experience. I have international experience with people
yeah.
from
They're
all sorts of
great.
countries. Yes, with the like fraction of a percent from
Exactly.
skimmed up the top. So, yeah, it's obviously much easier for people who are in the elite class to have good experiences with people from abroad.
Yeah, that's what's even worse because a lot of when the elite they are pretty much isolated from the whole thing. I really do feel bad for Europeans especially because a lot of these people are just average people. And, their background, they've been in wherever they were for many many generations, and all of a sudden their society's changing because you're getting an influx of new people who aren't necessarily very well behaved. They're not very economically productive, and then you can't talk about any of it. They don't enforce the laws. If you say something bad, they might throw you in jail. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. It is, and it's really kind of disconcerting because, like I said, you go there, especially coming from like I said, second tier country where I'm from,
Mm,
and you expect things to be, orderly, people to be respecting the law and all of this. And there just seems to be this whole category of people that, we don't talk about, we don't, they kind of untouchables in a
mm,
strange way. So it's very very strange, and I think a lot of kind of this huge pushback that you've seen against woke, which exemplified in Brexit, which turned out pretty badly, but and obviously Trump won and Trump 2 now,
mm,
is people in their day to day life encountering these tensions,
mhm,
being lied to their faces, being suppressed and just like saying just obvious things that are just so incredibly just like laughing in their face every day, and having real world consequences from them, whatever it might be, being subject to crime, or just, yeah, just seeing the difference between what is said to them and what actually happens in real life. And yeah, I mean, eventually something's got to give, and this is what happens.
yeah.
um
There's definitely a rising backlash against woke. I think a lot of the people. Nathan Confus, he wrote a piece saying that woke isn't going anywhere. It's just getting started, and I think he's right. I don't think you're having the end of woke anytime soon, because uh the people who are behind it now, and especially the generation coming up, are as woke as heck. You know, the newer generations, they're the people who have been growing up on this stuff. They've been isolated from facts. They don't know any of this stuff, and they're the people that are coming into these institutions. You're just going to have more woke and an even crazier level of woke. And of course, as Conference points out, the fundamental problem hasn't changed, and that is that we deny human biodiversity, and which is the fundamental driver of wokeness. So Yeah, we're gonna have more insane woke, but I think we're also gonna have more pushback. So I'm seeing more conflict down the line. I think in the States, I think we're gonna have a lot of interesting things shake out of Trump's second term. There's going to be a lot of craziness in the coming years.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do think there's a sort of preference cascade for a lot of younger people who, yeah, like you said, they've grown up completely insulated from facts, but at the same time, they've also grown up with wokeness being kind of the mainstream narrative. This is what's taught in schools. This is what their cringe teachers believe. It is obviously untrue if they compare it to many, experiences in their own lives. And this is
yeah,
just like, lies about basic things, men are women, women are men, just random stuff that, you know,
uh,
if you're a young person nowadays and you're trying to assert yourself against the system and to show that you are intelligent, like becoming more woke is probably not the best thing to do. I think my fear now is that the right will overplay their hand because they are winning now in many ways, obviously, in
yeah,
terms of and it's there's kind of a maelstrom of people who are really excited to destroy woke, but a
yeah,
lot of them are really dumb, and the problem is that
yeah.
it,
Oh yeah,
it could become cringe. It could become, it was very cool up to the point where people started winning. And now, because the critical mass has gained, a lot of people are overplaying their hand. They're just like, now, post
yeah.
about Adolf Hitler being really cool and stuff, have 100,000 likes on X, and, the Jews, the women, there's always
Mhm.
some nemesis that needs to be fought. And people really are frothing themselves up beyond the limit where this is, actual truth, but it's very much overplaying their hand.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's how these things go work online, but it's very hard to keep being the cool side. And I think the right has managed it up to this point in many ways, but now the pendulum's swinging back. So I really am curious what's going to happen in the next 5 years.
yeah. I mean, I think any victory to the right is sort of self-limiting because cringe is inevitable. Because in order to win, you have to get the masses, and unfortunately, the masses are dumb. And and when you have that mass in place, and you're just going to get dumb things out of it. It's inevitable. The hope is that every time the right gets a victory, there are enough smart people in it that at least some useful things will come out of it. Um, I mean, I think, like, for example, Elon Musk, for example, he's doing a lot of amazing things. That doesn't mean I agree with everything he's saying. I don't know about this whole Department of Government Efficiency stuff, but he is doing a bunch of amazing things, and he's showing science and technology are cool. I mean, that's good. I wish we weren't in a world where people get their main factual information from Twitter. I love Twitter, but I wish you didn't have to go to Twitter to find out the real world facts, and that's kind of where we are. But I hope that that when the power shifts to the sides of the right, some good things come out of it, and I think it will. I think some good things came out of Trump one, and I think some good things will come out of Trump two, even though we'll get a lot of cringe along with it. That's just a given, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. I think the only problem I have with the cringe is that it really, sets a limit on how long power can last.
Yeah,
Because the idea is that, how much can you get done in 4 years? If you overplay your hand enough, after 4 years, people will be tired of you and your cronies and like concentric circles that represent your power base. And then they'll be like, no, anything but this, and then they'll change back to the other guy, and you have this dumb tug of war where any sort of policy that is worthwhile takes more than 4 years to implement. It has a longer vision. You need to put things in place that are not just like from today to tomorrow. So I think if the right wants to implement anything that's any sort of immigration, I think you know uh, um he was just on the podcast. Sorry, too late in the day, but we were talking with a previous guest about the fact that immigration is a really tricky one because you need a long-term policy for
Yeah.
immigration that is consistent and doesn't just flip-flop from every 4 years. It's like, oh, you turn off the hose now, but 4 years from now someone's gonna crank it up even more to compensate for your level that you've. So it's the same with pretty much any sort of policy.
Yep.
So what you'd want is a cultural victory, something that makes it so that the right is the part of the cool smart people that have a vision that is useful for the future, rather than the flavor of the month and like, oh, we showed the leftists, we killed the woke, and now we're going to set up a Reich that lasts 1,000 years or whatever ideas people have, because that's not how it's going to happen. And letting these forces, whatever, Nick Fuentes, stuff like that, have any say within what's actually happening in power, I think is very is probably not a good idea, because it all feeds into this overplaying of the hand. This will be punished. This will be punished. You're not going to abolish democracy tomorrow, even though some people imagine, no, in 4 years you're going to get smacked down. That's what's going to happen if you think that you can go too crazy on this stuff.
I think that if they concentrate on building the wall, that will be and actually get it built, that will actually be a permanent victory, because it's going to be, it's going to be hard to undo that. Any other policy, like you're going to limit immigration or deportations, which probably really aren't a good idea, those can get undone, but the wall will stand. So if Trump can actually get that done, you might actually make a difference going forward. You mentioned Nick Fuentes, a little story about that. He's the guy behind the whole nonsense, your body, my choice thing. One of my friends posted a meme that I had to laugh at that. It was a dude starting with the your body, my choice, and it was just slash from Danny DeVito from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he's just going, so anyway, I started blasting. And I'm like, yeah, that's the attitude to have. It's unfortunate you have to have right-wing crazies anytime you have this kind of victory, but God bless the memers to have a response to some real crazy stuff. And lately, RFK and the nonsense he's throwing out about vaccines. Greg Cochran's out there doing the work, debunking a lot of that stuff. I should have realized this, but I didn't realize how much about the pandemic was forgotten in just the space of 3 to 4 years. Like, a lot of the facts that I and a whole bunch of other people have put out during the pandemic to try to stay ahead of the nonsense, a lot of that's lost on people nowadays. The fact that COVID was actually dangerous, that it did kill probably tens of millions, somewhere between 10 and 20 million all told. That's overall death rate, at least in Western countries, is about 1.5%. That the vaccine actually did work in attempts, in the sense of slashing the death rate. All that stuff is forgotten. It's crazy. It's like a lot of people, especially who came on after the pandemic, when Elon came in, they don't know about any of that. It kind of makes me concerned that if we ever get another pandemic, we have to go through all the same nonsense again. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah. This is just the nature of the information ecosystem.
Mm.
This is this is where people get their news, and the news is from like some guy in Malaysia, propping together videos from 17 years ago and, giving it a random caption and putting in some AI slop and whatever. So yeah, it really is, this is very kind of a left coded idea that, misinformation, fake news and stuff like that. But it's just baked into the the fabric of the internet. A lot of the stuff that you see online is either fake or out of context, or kind of just framed in a way to feed into whatever narrative that particular channel is serving. We see it on the left very clearly because it's not our narratives, it's their narrative, and we know how it plays into it. It's very but it's happening just the same on our side. So yeah, it's very hard to escape it. There is,
It was with COVID was a great example because it was fun watching. It was insightful watching it happen to actually see the nonsense being made because you know I was very active on Twitter at the time, and I can remember the nonsense, the play-by-plays as they were coming out. So this is how the crazy machine operates, and you see the same thing with so many other things, like with climate change or um, with diet and lifestyle in general. It's the same playbook of misinformation that comes from the right on all these topics. It's amazing. It's tough for a person who is just trying to figure out what is actually happening. I don't pity such a person.
yeah, it is really interesting as well to see what is left coded and what is right coded and how these things shift over time as well. Like I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, masks were for preppers and right wing freaks, and then they switched to being like the fashion accessory for the enlightened liberal.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
so
it's just fun watching the trends as they were being made, and it was insane. But one point of if this is progress or not, there's definitely a lot more activity coming from the developing world. Like a lot of what we're seeing discussion is, previously most of the discussion we're seeing was coming from the West or maybe some of it from East Asia or Eastern Europe or stuff like that. But you're getting a lot of formerly third world countries like the Middle East, India, and a lot of other those voices involved. And they're bringing their own flavors of ideas with
yes,
their own nonsense involved in it. And that's relatively recent. So I don't know. It's progress. They're
yeah,
getting connected and they're letting us know what they think. So
yeah, a lot of Roman statue avatars coming out of Mumbai
mhm.
recently. A lot of kind of LinkedIn style posters with 10 steps of, how to accelerate your B2B SaaS game. Yeah, it is really interesting. But yeah, obviously it's also a numbers game. Like there's just so many people with an internet connection and English skills who want to play the Twitter celebrity lottery or whatever, TikTok maven type situation. So yeah, I think it's inevitable that there's no barrier to entry. So there's going to be a lot of people trying it. But yeah, like you said, it's very interesting to see the local flavor. It kind of slips in sometimes, and in some expressions and some twists of the of the tongue. So
Or the
yeah,
agendas they have is really, I mean, you can, certainly like Middle Easterners and people from India or Latin Americans, they come in, they have certain agendas and you can pick them out. They're like, oh, okay, I see what your problem is. Like, the manosphere talk has really picked on with men from clannish countries because a lot of that is, more traditional patriarchal thinking. So, of course, it would resonate with them more. And it's just funny seeing them embrace it. Something that was originated mostly in Western circles, but it's really resonated with this clannish men.
yeah, I think you're right because it's the Manosphere kind of had a transition from what was essentially kind of pickup game, in understanding the female psyche so you could exploit its weaknesses, to now this kind of apocalyptic thinking of the whorishness of Western woman, and it's like what's this like side cut what's so
Yeah,
so it does have a very kind of, yeah, like you said, clannish flavor to it.
yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, and part of that is that's our culture in the future. Unfortunately, because you're having more immigration from these places, so you're going to import more. That's the great irony of modern liberal thought that we're going to be progressive and we're going to invite the world, only to not realize that the world you're inviting doesn't share your views. They share pretty socially conservative views. Um, so you have the immigration factor, and then you have selection in the population, slowly making the population more conservative, and not necessarily smart conservative. You're getting more fundamentalist conservative, and both of those things are going to take their toll on society in the future. Watching it.
Yeah, and this paper by Jonathan Anomaly about kind of the inherent fragility of liberalism, the fact that essentially it's kind of dynamic that you laid out. For whatever reason, liberal countries don't reproduce, and for whatever reason, they think that their belief system in the market, enlightenment values, and all this type of stuff is self-evident. It's almost like religious revelation. Anyone exposed to it will be instantly converted, and will start playing along, which just is not the case. So, yeah, it's unfortunately self-consuming. Yeah, hopefully it lasts a bit longer. I mean, I hope I
Yeah,
have big
that's my
plans for my
hope.
kids.
Indeed. I mean, that's my hope. I mean, I could see the weaknesses in weird people, weird white people, and how they think. Well, I like weird white people, and I like living around them. And, to think one day that they might not be so weird anymore for various reasons, that's not good.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what do you think about the possibility of kind of more fracturing around, state lines? Because now, there was this whole idea of, we're globally homogenizing, open borders, everyone's everywhere. But I think seeing, these differences and seeing like places that even the UK, a place that I really love, is really having issues with immigration, with ethnic tensions, political tensions. People are starting to migrate to more kind of trying to be locally associated with people that they can now find over the internet, which was not necessarily possible back in the day, where relying on clan, ethnic ideas, color, whatever, was just a better proxy for who was your people. But now you can actually kind of self-select into charter cities, into people moving to El Salvador, people moving to Costa Rica,
yeah.
things like that. So do you think there's a future now? Maybe the weird people will just respawn from these little charter cities in the future.
Maybe, maybe. You're definitely seeing a lot of geographic sorting. People are definitely moving to places with similar people. I mean, in a way, that's kind of happening with Florida. You see Florida shifting. It went from the battleground state from in year 2000 to now a reliable right wing state, and that's a lot of that's because of assortment. A lot of conservatives moving there. Um, yeah, you're going to see a lot of that geographic fragmentation, and there's definitely uh, some um, potential for conflict embedded in that, and it's going to be interesting seeing how that plays out.
You think that there is a potential for some sort of civil war type situation, conflict
Um,
between the states?
I don't know. I mean, my if I were to bet, I would bet against it, but who knows? I think that we've had more political tension in the United States in history than we've had now. It's been worse. So, you know,
Yeah, I am. I'm just thinking, I would also bet against it, just in the sense that things would have to be very, very bad before
yeah,
people take
you
to
know,
the streets.
that's the great irony about that. It's that, obviously everyone is not truly well off because a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck and don't know what their things are. But in absolute terms, pretty rich. A lot of the conflict these days are over status, not so much about wealth or just basic resources as they were in the past. Now it's more about status. Who has the power? That's one of the fascinating things about our society becoming more well off. The status is never in higher availability. It's by definition limited. So you see more conflicts over status.
Yeah, yeah. Then I mean that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's a different type of just battleground when you talk about status, because you see this in the inner city. There's actually, more warlike, and people actually, duke it out with machine guns over status. But in terms of just, your more classical groupings of people, it is fairly rare for people to, take to the streets with their guns to fight over status. You do have kind of intra-elite competition
Yeah.
within institutions, alternative media, kind of left and right battles now for, kind of now the incumbent, changing of the guards. But this is quite subtle, and it's not,
Yeah,
you know,
no, I mean, it's yeah, you don't see. I mean, for the most part, things like the riots in 2020 notwithstanding, you don't see a lot of real physical altercations. But I mean, a lot of the social battles and all the ring you hear from different sides, it's just about status. It's like who has the power. You know, everyone wants it, and the question is who has it. So,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess now Donald Trump has it. Yeah.
but no,
It
that's
is
gonna.
interesting. You had actually an interesting thread recently about essentially about status and kind of the baby boom, kind of about men's relative status compared to women, and that being probably one of the major drivers of the baby boom, the most recent baby boom that we know,
Mhm,
which was actually following a period of quite serious decline in fertility, and there were
mhm,
actually a lot of pieces back then, fearing, okay, what's going to happen? Pretty much the same as there is now. Obviously, no internet, but people were thinking about it in the same terms. Okay, what are we going to do? We're heading towards depopulation. If current trends continue, there's not going to be many people left. And then you had the baby boom, and I think it is an interesting observation that you make about the fact that there are fewer men and their relative status was higher. Yeah, maybe you could go a bit into that.
mm. Yeah. So the Great Depression, right? That's what led to the fertility crash, or one of the contributing factors of fertility crash in the early 20th century. You had that, then of course you had World War II. World War II, you lose a lot of the male population. You had women in the workplace, and following the war, you had the men that remained having this enormous boost in status. A lot of the strife you've seen in one of the big points of discussion you have on Twitter, and definitely one of the ways you can get a lot of engagement, is talk about dating woes. Pick a side. Either you know, if you want to start a misandrist or a misogynist Twitter account, you're going to get traction. Each side talking about the other, and that is driven by the relative lack of male status. Obviously, men don't like it because that makes it hard for them to find mates, and women don't like it because in their minds they can't find men worth marrying, men worth partnering with. So, you know, everyone's unhappy, and men especially want to get back to that really unique time where they had a relatively high point of status. Their status was got so much better off than women at the time. And the baby boom, it turns out, was driven mostly by earlier marriage. It wasn't driven so much by married people having more children. That was a factor, but the biggest driver was the fact that people got married earlier, and that allowed them to have more children. Yeah, men were just more marriageable. They had higher education, they had higher paying jobs relative to the cost of living at the time, and women were in poorer shape economically because while women in the workplace, that was more slanted towards older women, so younger women were more locked out. So men looked pretty good to the average woman, and nowadays that's not the case. Women can make their own money, and when they go to partner up with a man, they want a man that can bring more to the table, and of course that's numerically just going to be hard. Um, so what we really need to do to get out of that rut, to avoid the frustration you see out of William Foster from Falling Down, is that we need to make men great again, right? Um, I don't expect it to happen because I don't see how it could happen. You're not going to get women out of the workplace, nor should you. I don't think. I mean, why would you ask a woman to voluntarily give up their own independence and path? And it makes no sense. Look at it from the woman's point of view. Why would you put yourself in a position when you need to be dependent on a person? That's just not very wise. And you're not going to get men in a more better off position unless there was somehow a shortage of men. And I'm not recommending we start another world war for that purpose. So I don't see that problem leaving anytime soon. But
Yeah.
it did lead to a time where there was a relative period of prosperity globally. It wasn't even just the United States. A lot of many countries around the world experienced this post-war boom. A lot of the cases, it was a similar demographic situation where, you know, just plain gender ratio, there was just simply a shortage of men. I know that in Russia, that was a major thing, that they've lost such a great share of the male population that the few that remained became super manageable. And you had a population boom. It was great while it lasted, but
Yeah, it was kind of a perfect storm, like a confluence of also a culture that was still fairly traditional back
yeah.
then, and the expectation was still like, I think people underestimate how much how impactful the kind of the ambient expectation around you
Oh
is. Like,
yeah.
okay, what should you do with your life? And now I think a lot of those expectations have fallen off, and people have become quite risk averse. And the way to mitigate risk in your life is to make sure that you have your bases covered. And women really know about this.
Hmm.
We're naturally a bit more risk averse. So I know this is kind of a dream of a lot of guys in the manosphere. Just women not going to college, not doing
Yeah.
anything, just kind of waiting at home, demurely,
Yeah. That
dressed
ain't
to the
gonna
nines with their hair done up for a suitable man to show up and to take care of them for the rest of their lives.
that ain't
It's
gonna happen, brothers.
not it's a dumb, dumb, dumb strategy, and you have to be a dumb, dumb, dumb woman to try that. And it's probably not going to work because the men are not at your house. You got to be out there. And where do you meet them? You meet them in college,
Yep.
talking about assortative mating. You meet them at work. If you want to marry like a molecular biologist, you better be at least a lab assistant. You have to be
Exactly.
there. And the idea that these the women who serve you drinks at the golf club, have high chances of becoming wives. No, they have high chance of becoming some guy's mistress, and that's
Yep.
pretty much it. Those people don't wife up, except for people, I guess, the occasional car dealership millionaire who has a really a sweet tooth for coke, and he doesn't really care what social circles he's actually in. But those people are not as common as they're used to, the doctors and lawyers that women actually want to get married to.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's tough. It's tough to
But
know what to do as a woman.
the funny thing about that goes back to both the increase in more clannish men from poorer countries in the discourse, where you have those more patriarchal thoughts, and the conflict that you would between that and what you saw from Gregory Clark's data that found historically men did care about the status of their wives. They did try to find wives from these higher social levels to marry themselves. So when these more patriarchal men in the manosphere are coming about, oh yeah, you need to find these demure wives and stuff like that. In the West, that never really happened, and it's not going to happen now. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
we need to recalibrate. Yeah, it really is tough. I don't know. I have two sons. I mean, my only advice for them is to get good at whatever. Just
that's it.
have your niche, get good at it, and that's probably the best chance you'll have at success in anything.
Go
Niche
get the money,
specialization.
get the power, and then comes the winning. That's
Exactly.
it.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
and unfortunately, yeah, you can't really have it the
oh,
other way around.
that's the way it is. Um, I think the only thing that we could really do, and the one thing where the right wing manosphere has a point, is that our current immigration scheme probably doesn't benefit mid to low status men in the receiving countries that well, because they're, sure, you get female immigrants, but you also have male immigrants who are striving in their country, and they offer competition that they have to fight against. And I think if the one thing you could do to try to ameliorate the problem a little bit is to try to reduce immigration. And that wouldn't be a perfect fix, but probably would help a little bit. So that's probably your best bet, really. But otherwise, I think the dating woes and the type of complaints we're hearing from both sexes are going to go on for quite a bit. It fundamentally comes down to women have their own money, and you have to somehow do better than that. And
Yeah, I think it's also the the expectations for the male, just given the fact that we're not kind of in the ancestral environment anymore, are just completely different. The idea
it's
of provision and protection.
it's
Okay,
driven.
protection
It's
from what exactly? Now
yeah.
you have the state has a monopoly on violence.
Mhm.
You're probably going to get locked up if you protect too hard. You're not really protecting much, are you?
No.
Provision, we have that taken care of. So it's just the balancing act there is really tough, and a lot of men, you know, to be honest, are not. They don't contribute the same amount in terms of children and family. I know a lot do, but just tendentially, they're a bit more detached from the sphere. So you have a lot of complaints from
As,
women. It's like, what
as you would
exactly are you adding?
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
So
it's
it's
it's it's it's driven by status. I mean, the expectations that people have are set by the status of their time. Women want, people in general want what other people have, and women want what other women have. And if the current status is, the house, the car, the two cars, the kids with the college degrees, and all this, all this traveling you have to do, if that's the baseline expectation, that's what a man has to bring, you know.
Yeah, it depends. I don't know. I think that's probably the case for a lot of people, especially kind of women who, maybe come from lower class and are aspiring to kind of ascend. They're looking to get this to level up, and it's understandable. Everyone's trying to, grow, be socially mobile. But I think a lot of women just kind of want someone who is on an equivalent level. But the
Yep.
fact is that in a family, if you want to have children, the burden on the mother is very high.
Yes.
It's with children, physical, all of the stuff, just emotionally very much involved in it. And then it really kind of goes very much off kilter once you have kids. And, if you're both bringing in an equal paycheck, it's like, okay, now I'm putting in much more. Like I'm putting in the hours to take care of the kids and all this type of stuff. And then it's just it really is tough. There has to be a lot of understanding, a lot of emotional maturity on the part
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
of both people, and a lot of
It's
people just don't have that.
amazing how lacking that is. Because a lot of the discourse I see, uh, that around dating woes, some of it's pretty sophisticated. A good bit of it is, but a lot of it just comes back to just basic lack of maturity. It's like, don't you people know any better? So,
Yeah, I think it's also people who, are inexperienced. Obviously, who's going to complain about dating? People who don't really have. And then what is the coolest thing you can do out there and to kind of acquire status for yourself is to go out there and forcefully assert your standards. To
yeah.
say, "Oh, I need to do if you accept a man who does this, who doesn't buy you dinner, blah 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 blah, you're trash. You're not good enough. You have to be this, you have to be that. My standards are this. I only date virgins, all sorts of stuff like that." Well, I understand why people might come to express themselves this way, but if you're someone who's lived, who actually wants a real connection with a real person who's out
Mhm.
there, who's probably going to be flawed in many ways, it's just not realistic. It's quite
Yeah.
laughable to just look at this as like this bean counting exercise of oh, he's only got 5 points on the height scale, or it's just not how things really work in reality. I think it's much easier for people to relate to this because they're not in reality. They're on the internet all day. So they relate to all this abstraction rather than, to actual people in actual life. Dating apps the same. It's all just, all symbols, all abstraction, all, scales and spreadsheets. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear some of the silly requirements they have, I'm like, all right, you haven't lived life. That is your problem. Uh, And when they do, they get a better idea of how it really works. Because a lot of them is just blowing smoke. Half to 2/3 of whatever their standards are exaggerated from both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with dating apps, it's also really strange because the two sexes have very different strategies and actually how they deal with it. Like for men, typically they kind of like most women. They're kind of playing the lottery, seeing
Yep.
whichever women like them. So they just like everything. Women, on the other hand, if they like a guy, they probably, would like to have a conversation with them because they know if they swipe right on whatever guy, there's probably going to be a match because men have this strategy, because they'll be open to more casual stuff, because they don't really care if they get attention from women. That's okay. So essentially, women are very much more selective on the apps because they know there's probably something's going to happen because the guys want to have sex. So
Yep.
essentially, yeah, it's a weird combination. So that's why a lot of times if an app has a filter of like, oh, above 6 feet, women, just to have their basin of potential mates, because they have to just like trawl through all of them because all of them like them, because most of them use this strategy.
Yep.
They just say, okay, I would you like a guy over 6 feet? Yeah, I would like a guy over 6 feet. Actually, in reality, is that necessary? No, it isn't. But it halves my pool of potential applicants. I have to trawl through lesser of the guys who want to send me a dick pic or whatever. So yeah, ideally, yes, over 6 feet. Ideally, he
Although
has to
if
have a
you're
master's degree. So things like that.
although if you're a 6 foot woman, I can see how you would want a man over 6 feet.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, it depends obviously on individual characteristics as well. But yeah, like a lot of this essentially it's data segmentation.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from the perspective of the woman, it is in some ways there's a necessity to segment the data somehow.
Yep.
So because it's just a lot of it. So I'm sorry to say, because there's all these, there's a very famous graph online about, women rate men this way and men rate women like on a normal distribution. Women just like, I don't know, whatever, don't like all men. It's just essentially it's a visual representation of this strategy where men just like pretty much every woman on these apps, except for, I guess, the odd really ugly one. And then women just only like a small percentage of guys because they know that on the other end, guys just like them, all of them. So it's not a very productive way to spend your time on the app.
No. I mean, I don't pity people in modern dating situations. Although I've seen it said that we see a statistic about how 80% of relationships these days begin online. It turns out that's not actually true. I forget the fellow now, but he did an analysis and found that it's at most somewhere with more like 25% start online. That most relationships are still starting the more traditional ways. Um, but you mentioned how women find it hard when they're in a marriage, and then they have children, and they find it harder to have a dual income situation, and then throw motherhood into the mix because they have to work and they're doing the lion's share of taking care of the children. Yeah, dual income relationship and children is tough. That's when something of something the more patriarchal ideal would start to become uh more fitting. But if you have a dual income, people create their own problems and don't even realize it. The quest for status. If you have a dual income and you have children, you're going to be living in a place that's going to require that money, right? You're going to be living in a place where you need to have that much money to live. And unless you can find a place to go where you can have the same quality of life for a much lower standard of living, it's going to be hard for one of the parents to scale back on their job. So, yeah, that definitely also eats into fertility.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah, for
sure.
sure.
And I
And I
think a
think
lot
a
of
lot of
people
people underestimate
underestimate
how
how important it is to just find someone who's sane,
Yeah, what
who,
a challenge.
because a lot of the discourse online and all of this is about, will you have like a, soy lib type of marriage? Are you going to be a cuck marriage, or is it going to be a patriarchal, serious, manosphere, tinged relationship where gender roles are different? Like there are different phases of life. Like when you have children, it makes sense for the woman to take a step back from from her job, and
Yeah.
then you downscale your living situation, or you essentially kind of have to adapt to the situation that you're in, and then potentially she might pick it back up. So it's not like, oh, you're just, soy cucking it until, you have children, and then you get super patriarchal, and then you fit into this mold, and then you suddenly, become more soy when she goes back to work, 5 years later or whatever.
Yeah,
It's just,
it's
it's not
hard.
adapted
It's
to.
hard for young people because I mean, younger people don't know. That goes back to the life experience, right? They don't know what you have to just tune a lot of that out, right, and do what works for you. But a lot of younger people, they have no idea what you actually have to do. So they hear all these things saying that, oh, your relationship has to be like this, or you don't want to be too liberal, or you don't want to be a cuck, or whatever. And they take that to heart, and then they think, oh yeah, that's what I got to do. So no, you don't have to do all that. You have to
Yeah.
do what works for you. Find an arrangement that works for you and your partner. Um, that goes. What is it? Was it Date Site? It's just said this, or I forget who it was, but pointed out that a lot of relationship difficulties are ameliorated when there's actual love in the relationship. You
Yeah,
know,
that's the thing that's left out by a lot of this
that's the
discourse.
fundamental issue. All the rest of your stuff you're doing are one thing, and yeah, you should probably, there's some times where you should probably do this better or do that better or whatever. But the fundamental issue is that there has to be love because that's what actually drives you to care about what the other person wants. You know,
Yeah, no, and that's I think that's a really sweet note to kind of wrap up. But I do want to ask you the question that I ask everyone,
go for
which
it.
I forgot to announce before, which I usually do, but I forgot this time. Do you have any kind of recommended thinker, someone that you think that is maybe underrated, that people would do well to read, or that maybe has been influential in your thinking?
I was a long list of people, but number one
Okay.
on that list is Greg Cochran, definitely. 'Cause I think that he's kind of getting swept away by a lot of more prominent voices, and he's definitely the real breaks through the science of the situation. And there's a lot of things that even smart people believe that turn out to be wrong because they really haven't thought it through, or they have a poor understanding of the physics and the math behind it. So he's definitely one I would think people should stop by and check out if they want to break down the nonsense coming from both sides. So number one, and aside from of course, there are other people who are doing well. There's I/O, there's Cremio, there's Emil Kierkegaard, Jonathan Pallison. There are a lot of really good voices out there. But one who is not getting his due is, I would say, Greg Cochran.
Yeah, yeah, he's an interesting character. He's always like very like curmudgeonly,
Oh
in
yeah,
the comments, and
you should interview him. You should
yeah,
interview.
I should. Yeah,
I
he's
think
been
we're,
on the short list for a while.
yeah, definitely interview him. I think he'd like to talk to you, and you'd get some really fun things out of him.
Nice. No, perfect. Yeah, that's a really good a good heads up. Yeah, I'll do that if he agrees to come on, obviously. But yeah, I'll talk to him. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, JayMan. I
Oh,
want to
thank you.
give people the impulse to sign up to. You still blogging, or I know I find you on
Well,
Twitter all the time.
I am going to put together. There is something I'm working on because I want to get back into talking about parenting. I just mentioned real quick that
Mhm.
yeah, this is probably the first time I've had one of these that didn't talk about parenting.
Nice.
Parenting is overrated, people. The behavioral genetics is pretty well established. We have decades of twins and adoption studies that show that what you do as a parent doesn't matter that much. You keep your kid alive, healthy, and safe. The rest is gravy. All those rules, whether or not you're building self-esteem or tearing down self-esteem, that's all nonsense. It has no real effect in the long run. I'm working on a piece to reiterate that, and especially looking at some of the other things, some more recent findings that we're looking at income, education, and criminality. Like concrete things that people care about, where some research is claiming to find an effect, and I dug into it, and the effect is not as strong as people think, and more importantly, it doesn't last. That's the key thing. They may be transient effect, but it doesn't last. So parenting's just not that important. I mean, keep your kids alive, keep them safe, keep them healthy. The rest is mostly gravy.
Yeah, I love hearing that, but at the same time, as a parent, it's just so counterintuitive. I just
It
feel
is.
like
It is
I'm so
counterintuitive. Yeah, it goes against Western thinking or high investment parenting thinking. You know, in uh, historically farming societies, cold weather farming societies, high investment in children was important because childhood mortality was very high up until fairly recently, up until like the 19th and 20th century. A lot of kids didn't make it to age 18. So parents really had to do a lot to invest in their children. So I think somehow this lends itself to the idea that you can shape your children when you can't. You know, everything is either genetically set or at random to the whims of random forces completely outside of your control. But people don't believe that, and I think I see it come up on Twitter every now and then about how this parenting trend comes in, or how you should do this, or how the one of the latest ones I saw is about how self-esteem has been built up or broken down because of how we're meant to think about self-esteem and all. And I just keep thinking, oh, that's such nonsense. Complete
yeah, and
nonsense.
it's antenatal now nonsense as well. Like
Exactly. That's one of the biggest problems. I mean, that was Brian Kaplan's thought that it impacts fertility. If you think that what you do is so important to your children, you're going to be afraid you're going to make a mistake. But in reality, you're probably not. You know?
yeah, and it involves like it limits the number of children you can possibly have because you have, attachment parenting, you have
Oh,
co-sleeping, you need all this type of stuff where,
oh,
anything you might do, you say a wrong word and your child's mental health implodes, and you can't have too many children if you might make a mistake with any one of them. So yeah, it's
yeah.
it's
That
it's
goes back
really.
to lacking experience. I think a lot of younger parents are more likely to fall for that nonsense than older parents. Older, more experienced parents are going to know that, or more likely to know, I should say, because a lot of older parents believe in parenting even so. But I think more older parents are more likely to think that that's all. You know, once you actually start having children and you see what you got to go, you realize that that's all not.
Yeah,
But
they come with quite a lot of firmware, so
yeah,
it's surprising. Well, I want to thank you again. This has been really enjoyable, and I really want to point people to your Twitter, which is going to be in the notes to this podcast. Yeah,
well,
yeah,
thank
and
you
and
very
also a
yeah,
lot of old like blog posts that I've just discovered while researching you this week, and yeah, there's a lot of gold there, so people should go into that as well, and the new ones which are coming up soon. So thank you so much.
thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, please do not forget to like it, to subscribe, or to go to alexkashuta.com, which is my Substack, to be part of the larger community and to please support the podcast and its production. This is what keeps the lights on, and I appreciate your support very, very much.